I wanted to talk about kind of two things today. They're coming out of both of these courses on the Buddhist course pathway. There's three pillars to it. There's origins of the tradition, there's understanding kind of the teachings, and then there's the third pillar is living it in your everyday life. So this live event is kind of a pairing of these two classes. There's one course called From Practice to Philosophy in the understanding section. And in here, you'll find explanations on the teachings of emptiness and also on the theories of how our minds work and how we think about things and how we cognize things. And in the United States, the emptiness teachings tend to be very positive. I added this little plus sign and minus sign to remind myself. Emptiness and oneness, they just sound warm and fuzzy, and they're very popular in the United States. But it could also be negative if you realize you have no self and that you have no fixed permanent identity. That could be scary, but it's usually not taught in that way. And then the one on consciousness tends to be a little bit more negative sounding because it kind of questions the way we think, and that a lot of our opinions have been converted into facts, and that we also have confirmation bias a lot. We only see things that kind of confirm what we believe to be true. And so in our tradition, sometimes it sounds a little negative because our founder Shinran was very aware of the games we play with our minds and how we kind of project our reality onto the world. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then the second course that you could pair with this, like a good wine with cheese, is the living course called A Process-Driven Life. And this has to do with how do you create habits? How can you change yourself? And I think most of us believe that if we're in a real predicament, we need heroic efforts to make a change in our life. But that's not actually the case. Life is a marathon and not a sprint. And most of the messes or situations we've got ourselves in are the result of a long period of time where habits just effortlessly take hold within us. So we're really good at creating habits as human beings. And my theory is what the Buddha did often is he didn't ask us to change our stripes or to reinvent ourselves. He used the aptitude that we already have. We're master habit makers, and we do it effortlessly. And so without having to change who we are, we can develop new habits and rely on this innate skill that we've always had. And also, one of the important things of habit making is it really needs to be a want to and not a have to. So if it becomes a want to, then the level of effort that you need to exhibit or exert to create new habits is quite low because it's somewhat fun. It's something that you want to do. And then I wanted to mention down below, it's another plug. These images are from the app on the iPhone. So if you have an iPhone, there's a really nice app that you can download to consume our content on the go. And then I also wanted to talk about this title, From Practice to Philosophy. Oftentimes that seems backwards. It seems like you'd have the doctrine and then the practice. But I've heard a Catholic nun once say that all religions started with practice, and then the philosophy came about later to try to justify or explain why the practice works. And so that's one of the things that's covered in here are these two philosophical schools of emptiness and of consciousness only. So today we're going to focus on making resolutions. How do we change our lives? How do we make progress? And this topic comes up often around New Year's Eve. We are notorious at making really grand New Year's resolutions that state a goal, but there's no path. There's no process to get there. And it turns out that January 2025, the second Friday, actually was January 10th, and it's called Quitter's Day. It only takes us to the second Friday in January for most of us to have given up on our resolutions. So it's called Quitter's Day. It's the second Friday in January, when around 80% of Americans who made New Year's resolutions have reportedly abandoned them. If you're one of the 20% or so who haven't yet ditched their goals, maybe it's time to join the quitters. And he says, I have, and he explains why this happens. So this was an article, New Year's resolutions, why do we give up on them so quickly, from January 11th, 2024. And Dr. Asim Shah shares why this happens so quickly and how people can set realistic and effective resolutions to keep for the entire year. It's easy to set a resolution at the beginning or end of December or the beginning of January, but studies show that 88% of people who set New Year's resolutions fail them within the first 2 weeks of the year. So that seemed really high to me, but I identified with it. So common resolutions include exercising more, losing weight, or saving money. And Shaw says that with these, people tend to go too hard, too quickly, instead of taking small steps. He explains that the number one reason people may give up is because their goals are unachievable or idealistic. So for example, if I made a resolution that said, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, I'm just stating the goal I want to achieve, but there's no process, there's no practice. Like, what are you actually going to do to make that become a reality? That's the missing part. So Dr. Shah says, we always advise making resolutions that are easy and achievable and starting off by making very small steps. Don't jump to the big things. If you want to lose weight, make your goal realistic. So a realistic goal would be something like, I'm just going to take my dog for a walk around the block. That's all I'm going to do. Or I'm going to walk to the store that's on the corner instead of driving. I'm going to take the stairs at work instead of the elevator. That's my resolution. And those resolutions are the only ones that we have any chance of realizing and have them be life-altering in the long term. So I wanted to share this book with you, and I'm going to share a couple YouTube videos as well. But this book my wife read, and it's related a lot to this topic today. It's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And so in Buddhism, we want to find things that we already know how to do, that are relatively easy, that don't take a lot of motivation, that can be transformative over time. So if you look at the Buddhist tradition, we already know how to breathe. That's not a new skill. It's easy. We breathe all the time without even thinking about it. We know how to walk. We all know how to bow. We know how to reflect on our thoughts, oftentimes in an obsessive way, but we know how to do that. We know how to speak, right? We could chant. We know how to listen, so we could listen to the Dharma. We know how to sit. We know how to sit on a cushion. And we know how to respond and react to people. And so I think in the Buddhist tradition, these all represent very important practices that accentuate or rely on something or a skill that we've already mastered. So when you come to one of our temples, every person on their first day is able to practice in a profound way by using skills that they already have. So there was a little bit of a chaos or scandal or brouhaha. I didn't know what to call this course, and I'm going to use a video called Neuroplasticity, and this was roundly rejected as the title for this live event because it's a confusing medical term. But it just means that throughout our life, our brain is much more malleable and it's much more able to respond to influences than we think. We really don't have a fixed mind, and we just keep creating habits throughout our lives. It's just that we get stuck sometimes with the habits from our youth, and we stop growing and changing as we get older. So at our temple, in our service book, we have something called the Golden Chain. And I wanted to kind of share with you the emphasis of this reading that we do. It talks about Amita's golden chain of love. It talks about every living thing being protected and connected. And it uses this word chain over and over again to try to emphasize oneness and interconnectivity. But one of the Dharma school students at our temple, who was quite young, reminded me that there's another side to this. So the first side that I just highlighted is emphasizing interdependence and interconnectedness that we call emptiness in that course I shared earlier. But this student was kind of amazing. She told me that I was missing half the meaning of this reading, because it also talks about our thoughts, our words, and our deeds. And so this is kind of emphasizing these two aspects of Buddhism. Everything is interconnected. Everything is without a permanent fixed identity, but also our habits, our thoughts, our words, and our deeds help create the world that we live in. It's the way we see the world, and the way we interact in the world is through these three windows. And so thoughts, feelings, impressions are modeled metaphorically in the Buddhist tradition as seeds. And these seeds create kind of habitual thoughts. We kind of get in a rut in our thinking. And these seeds also influence how we experience the world moving forward. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. There's a reinforcement going on through repetitive thinking. And we also compose objects in our mind. We have our sensory perceptions, and then we kind of construct that into some identifiable object. And it can be prejudiced and obscured by previous habitual behaviors. So these are kind of like the three main points in Buddhist psychology. We're only able to hold one thought in our minds at a time. So we really aren't scatterbrained. We really aren't thinking about too many things at once. The real problem we have is swapping. We're constantly swapping in and out of different contexts, and it's exhausting. We also effortlessly assign meaning to the events in our lives. So it feels like meaning is external to us, that we're just kind of receiving meaning from objects all around us, but we actually construct that meaning internally. And so that's why two people can witness the same event and have two completely different interpretations, is this meaning assignment is really involuntary, but it's happening internally. It's not fixed out in the world. It is done by ourselves within our own minds. And another big aspect is that our minds follow our bodies. So this is much different than Christian thought. I think in other religions, you have a set of beliefs, you lead with your mind, and hopefully your behavior changes if you change your beliefs. But in the Buddhist tradition, if we can still our body, if we can listen carefully, if we can relax when we breathe, the mind follows. The mind becomes calm and placid and supple and malleable when we can breathe and sit and reflect. So Buddhist practice relies on these basic characteristics that we have without heroic efforts. So I'd like to share a couple short videos with you on neuroplasticity from the scientific point of view.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road.
So this is an explain how we get new pathways, how we develop new ways of thinking.
Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature.
So this is kind of explaining the seeds metaphor in early Buddhism, right? The more you think a certain way, it's easier to go down that pathway. And so we're just trying to create new avenues through Buddhist practice. By breathing, mindfulness, by accepting everything in your life as it is, not hyper-focusing, trying not to be dualistic, trying to realize, keep telling yourself, these are my opinions, they're not facts, helps you be able to have conversations with different people and see things from different perspectives. I have a lot of beliefs and feelings, and that's good, but I realize that they're based on my upbringing, right? It's the way I was raised. It's the influences that acted upon me as I was young. And so it doesn't make them rarefied. It doesn't make them fixed. And everybody has them. And so that makes conversations easier when I kind of have that understanding.
The old pathway gets used less and less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action.
So the next one is the one I really like. It gets easier and easier.
The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
And so this is, I think, just basic, human physiology that the Buddha took advantage of. And so as Western people, we tend to appreciate a scientific explanation, and we usually focus enlightenment as something that occurs only in the mind. But from the Buddhist point of view, these practices survived because they were effective and they worked. And so that's why they're true. It's because they worked. It's very pragmatic. And so that's how Buddhism developed. The other thing, too, is that Buddhism has much more of a focus on the body. So there's also muscle memory. Like I bow now without thinking. I defer to people in the restroom and let them go to the urinal before me without thinking. I am not trying to be nice. It's just the culture of the temple has rubbed off on me. And it's this type of behavior that changes who we are effortlessly. One time, my daughter had a recital at her high school, and my wife and I were a little bit late. And when we came into the threshold of the entrance door, I bowed without thinking, like I do at church. And when I hit the bottom of my bow, I realized you're at your daughter's high school audition or performance, and all the parents were staring at me, and I didn't know whether to bend down and pretend to tie my shoe or pretend I found a penny. But I just got back up and went to my seat, and one of the ministers here thought that was great. I finally bowed without being self-conscious, without trying to be profound, without trying to be compassionate. It had become an ingrained habit within myself, and now I'm just a bowing person. So there's somebody else I really like. His name is B.J. Fogg. He's a PhD in behavioral science, and the book is called Tiny Habits, Small Changes That Change Everything. So he developed this chart, and I have read that if you're a consultant and you want to present alternatives, the biggest it can be is a 2x2. Otherwise, it gets too confusing. This is a 3x5. So there's 15 different cases here. It's a little much and it's a little confusing. But what his basic message is on this behavior grid is that there's 5 different approaches we could take along the top, horizontal. We can do a new behavior. We can do a familiar behavior. We could increase the behavior we already do. We could decrease the behavior that we already do, or we could just go cold turkey. And if you want to do something one time, all these will work for you. You could run a 5K once. You could ride your bike more often. You could increase the behavior. You could. It says here, you could plant more trees and native plants. You could decrease a bad behavior. You could maybe eat less meat for a day or two. And the last one was you could just stop altogether. You could not turn the heat on in your house for a day or two if you really wanted to save money or something, or be economical or ecological. So dot behaviors are relatively positive in that you can do this. Like it says here, one time you could do almost anything one time and be successful. And then the next one is a span behavior. This is doing something for a period of time. So maybe for a month or two, you could do a new behavior like carpooling to work for a month or two is something relatively easy to do. You could bike to work for 2 months. You could recycle. You could recycle more and be more dedicated for 2 months. You could decrease a behavior. You could take shorter showers for several weeks. And then the black span is you could stop something altogether. This one would be dire, but you could not water your lawn during the summer because of the drought. So whether it's a one-time thing or over a short period of time, you could be quite successful. So the dot behaviors are like a bucket list. You could cross them off your bucket list. These span behaviors are more like resolutions at New Year's. You can do some of this stuff for a while. It's just that it doesn't have legs. It doesn't get converted into a habit. So what B.J. Fogg says is that we really are focusing on is a path behavior, a behavior that's life-altering, that changes you from now on for the end of time. And he said that the only one that works is this blue path, is doing something familiar that you already know how to do from now on. These other ones are too hard and require too much motivation. And when the motivation dies, you end up giving it up. And so I think Buddhism lives in this blue path of trying to do a familiar behavior from now on that takes very little or no motivation or willpower. So I really like these videos I'm going to show you. This really helped me appreciate Buddhist practice. It's a marathon. It takes a long time. You have to stick with it. But maybe in a year or two, you'll look back and you will see a difference. You don't see it in the moment. You don't see it day to day. But over time, it is life-altering.
One other way of changing your behavior long-term, and I'll give you a hint, it does not have to do with motivation. Surprise. Motivation actually applies to other kinds of temporary behavior change, but not long-term. In other words, relying primarily on motivation to change your behavior long-term is a losing strategy. And similarly for willpower. So if you can take those off the table if you make the behavior change tiny enough. Now in this grid, this is where habits live, blue path. It's something familiar that you do from now on. And if you make that very tiny, like 2 push-ups, floss 1 tooth, and so on, it's very easy to repeat and make that become a habit. Think about it this way. You already know how to floss all your teeth. That's not what you're lacking. What you're lacking is the automaticity of flossing. So you don't need to train flossing all your teeth. You need to train making it automatic.
So I really appreciated this because my wife's a dental hygienist, and when I go to the dentist, they always ask me if I've been flossing, and I always say yes. I flossed today, in fact. So I have trouble flossing. It's never become a habit or something that I can always do. So now he's going to explain how it can become easy to do.
There are three things that have to happen at the same moment to cause a behavior. Number one, there has to be some level of motivation. You got to want to keep your teeth clean. You got to want to get stronger with push-ups or something like that. Next, you have to have the ability to do it. And then there has to be a trigger. Now, when I say trigger, I mean call to action. It's the thing that says, do push-ups now. Floss your teeth now, and so on. And it's these three things together. When they combine at once, then the behavior will also occur. A behavior, whether it's floss your teeth, do push-ups, what have you, send a thank you note. Now, motivation and ability are trade-offs. And this line, this curved line, represents that trade-off. And if you're anywhere above the line and the trigger occurs, you will do the behavior. So let me give some examples of this. Here below the line, let's say I want you to run a marathon, and you have no motivation to run a marathon. Both low motivation and it's hard. When I say run a marathon, you're not going to do it, no matter how many times I make that call to action. In contrast, if I say, oh, walk outside and walk back in, maybe 30 seconds, simple to do, you're above the line. Still, you may not be very motivated, but because it's so easy to do. Now let's move up here. It's hard to do. I'm asking you to do something very hard. In order to do something that's difficult, you need high levels of motivation. In fact, I think that's the purpose. That's the only use of motivation in our lives, is to allow us to do hard things. And if we're not doing hard things, we don't need that much motivation. When our motivation lags, boom, can't do it. Motivation is very slippery. So if you set yourself up to do something hard, and you have to somehow sustain the motivation is going to drop down, and there's going to be a point where you don't do it, and habits are about repeating it, and you won't create the habit. So as I looked at this, as I looked at my behavior model, I thought, let's go right here. Easy to do. Stuff that's so easy to do, it doesn't require much motivation at all. So whether your motivation's high, you'll still do it. Whether it's low, you'll do it. And so this is where the insight around, let's make it really tiny. Really tiny, like 1 tooth, 2 push-ups, 1 sip of water, and so on.
So I think this is what we try to do at our temples. We want chanting to be easy. It's not a high bar. Anybody can participate. Sitting in meditation on a chair, doing dasho, doing oshoko. These are all immersive practices that change the way we think and feel, but they don't take much motivation or willpower. And other scholars have said that willpower and motivation is like rocket fuel. It's very effective, but only in the short run. And we begin to lose interest, and our practices begin to fade. So for everyday people, we really don't have these marathon-style practices. I have 2 articles on my hard drive about how in Japan they will go on a trek, a mountain trek, for an entire year. And it's like running multiple marathons. It's unbelievably taxing and physically demanding, and only a young person could do it. And in India, there were monks that memorized like the entire larger sutra, verbatim, word by word. That's their practice. They're experts at memorizing sutras. These kinds of practices take heroic Herculean efforts in a monastic tradition. But for everyday people, it has to be something that's relatively easy to do and easily converts into new spiritual habits. So he's going to explain how outcomes occur by just doing things in the right place at the right time. Because of COVID, we all discovered how practicing and chanting in the Hondo has so much more energy and impact when it's done in a communal setting than when it's done at home over video. And my wife found this in yoga as well.
Here's the phrase, and it comes down to this. I live up in the wine country. I do a lot with the earth as much as I can, and this seems to map exactly what I'm talking about. Plant a tiny seed in the right spot, and it will grow without coaxing. The tiny seed. This pumpkin came from a tiny seed that actually we didn't even plant. It came from the chicken manure that we put in the garden, and it grew. We didn't have to do anything to it. It just grew. Tiny seed in the right spot. So I encourage you to look at your lives, look at what you want to change, break it down to tiny behaviors, and put them in the right spot. The right spot is after something you're already doing, and allow it to grow. You don't have to amp up motivation. You don't have to draw that much on willpower. All you have to do is plan it out and let this natural process emerge. Thanks, everybody.
So this video by BJ Fogg is available as a TED Talk up on YouTube. So I started to look at Buddhism a little bit more critically, with a little bit more focus. And I started to notice that a lot of the vows that we make are impossible. The goal is unachievable. And I think what that does is it forces us to focus on the process and the path. So one example of this is the Bodhisattva vows from our service book on page 23. It says, beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. And so each one of these statements is kind of paradoxical. I'm going to do something that cannot be achieved. And so that's another way of forcing us to focus on process and on the path. And so you could argue from a Mahayana point of view, somebody who has this vow and has this frame of mind and is actively helping all beings has achieved the goal. The goal is the doing, right? It's not the finish line. The activity itself is awakening. And I have one more I wanted to share with you. This is one of my favorites. This is from the larger sutra, and Amida's name was Dharmakara, and his teacher was Lokesvara. So Buddha Lokesvara was taught Bhikshu Dharmakara as follows. If, for example, one keeps on bailing water out of a great ocean with a pint measure, one will be able to reach the bottom after many kalpas and then attain rare treasures. Likewise, if one sincerely, diligently, and unceasingly seeks the way, one will be able to reach one's destination. What vow is there that cannot be fulfilled? So I think that's what this is doing, is turning vows on their head. You can't empty the Pacific Ocean with a pint measure. Reverend Wonder once said, where's all the water going to go? I mean, if you take it out, where are you going to put it? And you would never reach the bottom. But it's the activity of moving the water that is enlightening. That's the achievement of the goal. It's the process itself that's transformative. And so with that kind of focus and dedication and habit and effortlessness, how can we not all achieve insight and a life of meaning through Buddhist practice? And so chanting itself is insight. Bowing, having gratitude, these are activities. And so, sometimes you might ask somebody if they're a dancer or if they're a surfer, and they'll say, well, I'm not that good. I wouldn't really say I'm a dancer. I'm kind of a hack. But another way of looking at it is when you dance, you're a dancer. And when you run, you're a runner. It's the activity. It's a participation. When you walk the path, you're a Buddhist. It's an act of self-identification. And we're giving these practices so that we develop new habits. So I'm not done with my journey, But I noticed that I've changed a lot in the last 25 years. I listen better. I don't jump to conclusions. I assume when something's lost, it's my fault, and I'm almost always right. So I take a moment and I think to myself, well, I have a couple pictures that I'm going to use in a Dharma talk, but I went into the maintenance room during a festival. Somebody cut their finger, and I was looking for the first aid kit. And so I went into the room, and I went into the storage closet, and I looked everywhere, and there was no first aid kit. And I thought, this is insane. How can we have no first aid kit in the maintenance room during a festival? So I walked out of the storage room back into the main lobby of the room, and I thought, this can't be right. It's got to be me. It can't be the church. And I turned around, and right on the door, as you enter the door into the storage room, are two giant white metal boxes on the wall with red letters that say first aid. And I'm just oblivious by nature. I walked right by them because I assumed they'd be in the storage room, not hanging on the wall in the main maintenance lobby. And I realize I do this kind of stuff all the time. And so I haven't really changed my behavior or my personality. I still jump to conclusions. I just know I'm doing it now. I'm aware that it's a me thing almost always, and it's not an other thing. And, that's really changed my life. And rather than getting frustrated about things, I ask myself, what can I do? What could I do to make things better? And what could I do to take action? And so these are relatively small, easy changes, but it changes the entire context of my life and how I deal with the world and the way I interact with it. And I think this is because I've sat in meditation. I've watched my thoughts come and go. I've felt oneness with the Sangha when I chant. So all these practices have legs. They're transformative. They take very little effort. And over time, I think you go from having to chant the Jusege to enjoying it and wanting to do it. I used to think that silent meditation was the epitome of Buddhist practice, but now I prefer chanting. When I come out of chanting, my mind is clear and calm and open, and that never happens when I sit. So I think these are the ways that Buddhism sneaks up on us. We don't have to reinvent ourselves. We don't have to become different people. I'm still the type A Buddhist I always was, but now I'm kind of type A about practice and being on the path and being in a Sangha and having deep meaning in my life. So the point of this live event was that we are by nature habit creators, and it's what gets us into all kinds of troubles, but it's the very same mechanism that can take us out into the light of wisdom and be embraced by compassion within our temples and throughout our daily life. And so I really want to thank you all for listening. We got about 15 minutes left, so I'd like to conclude with Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Naman Dabuts, Naman Dabuts, Naman Dabuts, Naman.